And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the next session in the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness Summit. We are so glad that you are back, and we have our next speaker all ready to go. And before I introduce our next speaker, quick housekeeping notes. If you do need auto transcription enabled for the session, I invite you to go to our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/C3EB Summit, where the session is auto transcribed. So you will be able to participate in the session live while with your closed captioning on. You can also comment from there, as well as from the Hopin stage if that's where you are. And we are moderating all comments, and we will be moderating all questions so that our speaker can get through as many as we can in the time. With that, our speaker for this session is the one and only Pamela Bean, who is an empowerista at #HeadTrash. A little bit about Pamela before I hand the stage over to Pamela. Pamela was raised in Ohio with a Southern foundation. She attended Tuskegee University and HBCU in Tuskegee, Alabama, earning a bachelor's degree in marketing. She currently resides in Indianapolis, Indiana, and is a proud mother of a daughter, a son-in-law, and had a granddaughter affectionately known as Nugget. Pamela spent several years in corporate America in recruiting and HR, but decided to pursue her passion and calling of corporate event planning and empowering people to be the best themselves possible, hence #HeadTrash. And with that, I will give the stage to Pamela to introduce herself a little bit more. And today, Pamela is going to be talking to us about equity, HBCUs, and predominantly white institutions. Pamela, welcome to the C3EB platform and stage. The stage is all yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It has been an amazing summit thus far. I got a chance to look at some of the other check in, and I'm not that fancy or elaborate, but I hope that you all just kind of flow with me, and I hope that it's an enlightening and empowering session that we have. So let me just start again by saying my name is Pamela Bean, and I am an empowerment coach, coined as an empowerista. So thank you for coming and engaging with me as much in this much needed and interesting topic that we're having. So my why, I do want to talk about my why. My why is I am a second generation HBCU product, and I received exposure through my parents. Now, it was during this exposure that I learned the importance of the history of HBCUs, and at a young age, I was very, very attracted to them. So my senior year in high school, I did get accepted to Tuskegee, but I wanted to explore all my options. So I was accepted also at The Ohio State University, but my letter said that I would be known as student 1234. And at that point, I told my mom I did not want to be a number. I do want to go to a university or institution where I can be more individualized and get that attention, and all my students, faculty, and staff looks like me. So that's what started my journey, just being passionate about HBCUs. So when I was asked to speak about this topic regarding equity, particularly in Black History Month, the topic immediately came to me about equity in education, HBCUs versus PWI. So I also want to stress that this is a racial as well as a financial inequity, but you're going to hear a lot of acronyms during this segment. So I want to let you know what they are. The slide is up, and it's letting you know that the HBCU is known as a historical Black college or university. And they are schools that were founded on the belief that individuals deserve access to a college or higher education. The Higher Education Act of 1965 defines an HBCU as a school that was established before 1964. So that's very crucial. We have people saying that they attended an HBCU or is predominantly Black and calling it an HBCU. But if that school was not established by 1964, then technically they are not an HBCU. They just have a very high population in minorities. So I also did some research, and there are 13 abbreviations of PWI. But in education, it stands for predominantly white institutions. And that's a higher learning where whites account for 50% or more of the enrollment. So as you can see, that's a very large majority of schools in the country. So I do not want to sit up here and talk to you and give you Black facts about Black History Month. But I do just want to give you facts that just happen to be, we just happen to be in the month of February. So even though this is Black History Month, I won't give you a lot of facts about what African Americans have contributed to society, but instead I want to give you a high level overview to show you that there really wasn't any equity from the beginning of time with education. So hopefully after the end of this conversation, you will have, can be able to see this through a very different lens. So a prominent Washington lawyer, Elias Caldwell, he said some things that made us maintain the slavery mentality. And what that was the more you improve the conditions of these people, the more you cultivate their minds. You give them to relish all of these privileges, which they can never attain, and turn what we intended for a blessing, i.e. slavery, to be into a curse. He also went on to say that if you must remain in the present situation, keep them at the lowest state of degradation and ignorance. Wow, that's pretty powerful. And so that, to me, that's the mindset that there is no equality, there is no equity. And hopefully later on, I will show you the difference between the two. But my first point that I do want to talk about, and I want you to understand why there was a need for HBCUs and kind of what the history was. So this institutionalized discrimination led to the creation of HBCUs. They did assume the prominent places within the Black communities where teachers were seen as highly respected community leaders. However, the HBCUs did remain underfunded and ill-equipped, particularly in comparisons to white schools. So between 1902 and 1918, a philanthropic organization gave only $2.4 million to an HBCU. Compare that to the amount that he gave to a PWI, which was 25 million. 2.5, 25 million. Wow, that to me, that just screams that it's not equal from the very beginning. So, but does that sound like equity or equality to you? As you see on the slide as well, the first HBCU was Cheney University in Pennsylvania, and it was established in 1837. And of course, that was prior to the Civil War. But Harvard University, which is the very first PWI, it was established in 1936. So imagine all that time that Caucasians had an opportunity to go to school, and minorities, African Americans, were left behind because it was viewed as being subservient and just not being oppressed to educate African Americans. So of the 4,298 institutions that they are listed by the National Center of Educational Statistics, there are only 105 HBCUs, and they are primarily in the South or the East Coast. So again, 42,000 to 105. I mean, the weight is just not equal to me. So I don't think that there was equity from the very beginning, but we're going to talk about that. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about the difference between the two. What is equity and what is equality? You can see that equity, can't even read that, is giving, what is that saying? Sorry, you can read that. You can read that. I'm actually going to bring that up again later on in my speech, but I wanted to bring it up so that you know what the difference is, because I'm going to give reference to both. But the difference between the two, and if we are being completely honest with ourselves, we can say that education didn't even begin on the same level. HBCUs experienced inadequate funding. They were in rural locations. They did not have top-notch equipment or facilities. And you could not offer diverse curriculums. So disparity in education stems all the way back to K through 12. And I was doing my research, and that's a whole nother segment just to talk about K through 12. I'm talking about post-secondary education. So that is the foundation that helps you prepare for college, the K through 12. And if disparity in equity resides there, then of course it's going to continue and manifest over. Educational experience for minority students have continued to be substantially separate but equal. It's supposed to be equal, but is it really, has it really been equal? I can speak to that on my personal experience, and it was not the same, but yet still we thrived and survived and made a way. And I'll get to that here in a little bit too. But again, off of what I just said, does that sound like equity or equality? So the next point I do want to bring to you guys is just, where do we go from here? How do we create equity? So to me, that question is pretty much common sense. And if you are honest with yourself, you can see that it's not. But I will give you some textbook insight anyway. I believe that equity begins with education. You've got to educate the parents. You've got to educate educators. You've got to educate the students as to what HBCUs are and what the difference is between the two, and that they do have a choice. We also need exposure. So not only education, but exposure. You have to expose the parents. You have to expose the educators, and you have to expose the students, again, to HBCUs. Because we do that automatically with PWIs. And I have learned, especially in a state where we don't have an HBCU, those are the go-to schools, and they really push those. And I'm sitting here fighting for equity and equality, saying, hey, are you giving them other options and let them make that decision? It may not be as good as a fit for them, but let's at least let them make that decision by putting it on the table and educating them and exposing them. Another thing that we can move forward is responding to diversity and providing for successful inclusion for minorities with mainstream education. Kind of goes back to what I was saying is educate our diverse our kids that they do have an option. It doesn't necessarily have to be the primary white institution that you're known for in that particular state or that city or even the world, because Harvard is known throughout the world. But there are other options that you can go to outside of Harvard if that does not fit within your package there. So also, if you can set concrete targets and be intentional for more equity, I think we have got to be more intentional about exposing our kids and having equity in both sets of schools. And the final thing that I really think we need in order to move forward is more partnerships between the two. And what I mean by that is we need to share the resources to create opportunities to expand the footprint. Point in case is I live in Indiana, but I went to school in Tuskegee. Tuskegee is well known for their veterinary and engineering program, right? I live in Indiana, and Purdue University is very well known for their veterinary medicine and engineering program. My question to my alumni here, and I've talked to some people at Purdue and the University at Tuskegee, why have we not tried to do a partnership between the two so that we can do some type of intern, so some of the kids from Purdue can come to Tuskegee, so some of the kids from Tuskegee can go to Purdue, learn a different state of learning, learn a different culture, learn a different environment. And I think that that's all about educating and exposing. Also, too, I know that there are a lot of different educational institutions from a junior college. And if you go to a junior college, then that would allow you to go to some of the PWIs for a discounted rate or even a scholarship or for free, just depending on how well you did in that junior college. I also think that we as HBCUs need to forge those type of relationships and do the exact same thing. Why not present to them that if they go to a two-year school, that they can also morph over to an HBCU as an option, and be as successful as if they went to somewhere else. So I really do think that if we need more partnerships between the two in order to move forward and create some type of equity. So if you could, next slide, please. Let's kind of look at this slide, because to me, that is the most profound visualization of this topic. When I saw this, it just hit me so hard, because when I saw that the caption was, well, what's the matter? It's the same distance. Well, yes, it is the same distance, but look what all the obstacles that she has to go through versus as to all the obstacles as what he went through. And he also, not only being he, but a Caucasian man. And then she is a African-American woman, and she has a ball and chain on her foot, which we all know pulls you back and gives you a little delayed start. So I really do think that that is like an ultimate depiction of equity, because it's not the same. And I just wish that we all kind of embrace that it's not the same and we can kind of move forward. But there are a lot of people who are in denial that it's not the same. So I saw this and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it kind of fit with what I was saying with this. So what I definitely also want to talk about the next slide, if we could, please. I saw this, and to me, that was speaking the difference between equality and equity and what that meant. So reality is how things are today. And do you see how how the picture is? I mean, there's one guy that has all of these crates and he's standing really, really high. And then the African-American is on one crate. And then there's a poor little guy who doesn't even have a crate. But that's reality. And I wish that we would just kind of embrace it, and that would allow us to move forward. We just don't want to face the truth, or we try to think that it's something else. Then reality, to me, is that's how things are. It also could be that today. We try to work for it to be today, make it a little more even plane, but that's a little picture of how they are both all on the same crate, but they're still at different heights. So they can't see over the fence, but that's equality, right? And that's the purpose of being separate but equal, which was the big case and act of Plessy versus Ferguson. But also remember that the definition for equity, equality, is treating everyone the same. So equality is treating everyone the same. And if you look at that picture, it's the same because they're all on this one crate. So then the next picture is equity, which I really do think is a true integrate of the HBCUs and the PWIs. I think that that's kind of what we need to do, is integrate between the two. But look at that picture again, and remember the definition for equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. So in an HBCU environment, I don't know if they're giving us everything to be successful, because I wouldn't have the same resources and access to things that I probably would have had in a PWI, but I was still very successful in spite of it. Don't know if I would have had all of those lessons learned by struggling at an HBCU, but I definitely cherish some memories, and I think that every minority needs to experience an HBCU experience, because there's none like no other. So that is the equity. And then liberation, to me, is the ultimate goal. I mean, I think that that is something that we all need to try to reach as citizens, as people of the United States. And you see that there aren't any crates, there aren't any fences, it's just open, and they can kind of do what they want to do, and everyone's liberated to do what they want to do and be who they want to be. So when I saw this, it was really just spoke really volumes to me, and it was a reality check. So I also wanted to let you know about with the education and the exposures, which are some of the things that I had mentioned are ways that we can kind of move towards equity. There are typical myths of HBCUs, and they will be dispelled if we have education and exposure. And so I saw this article in Blavity News. I don't know if you guys read that. It is a online news owned by African American, but it's Blavity News. and they talked about the 6 myths of HBCUs. I did want to share that with you here real quick. And so one of the myths is that HBCUs does not prepare you for the real world. It's a myth. And the HBCUs struggle with accreditation. That's also a myth. The HBCUs are no longer relevant. I think that they're very relevant. And I would love to go into depth if you so desire and ask me. I can kind of share my experience on why I feel the HBCUs are relevant. But there aren't any diversities at HBCU is another myth, because that's not true at all. And then some HBCU student athletes, they don't land the professional sporting careers. Well, we know that's not true either. It's not the same magnitude as this. If they went to PWIs, they don't get the same exposures, but we can see that there are some NFL, some Major League Baseball, and some basketball players that have also gone to HBCUs and have done well in the mainstream. So even at the end of the day, and even in 2021, there must be a shameful acknowledgement that HBCUs and PWIs, they just did not start at the same point or even operate on the same plateau. And but even with that challenge, we are expected to have the same delivery and outcome. That is a huge expectation and weight on HBCUs and people who attend HBCUs. But we get by it, we get through it, we get past it. So I just wanted to share with you on the next slide just some of the success that we have had come out of these HBCUs. So it's been 25% of the African American colleges graduate early and earn their degree in HBCUs. So 25% earn their degrees at HBCUs. 50% of African Americans, the public school teachers, they graduated from HBCUs. 50% of all future African American lawyers graduate from HBCUs. 80% of African American judges, they graduated from HBCUs. And 38% of African American healthcare professionals, they all graduated from HBCUs as well. 41% of all STEM degrees in STEM, that stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, they were earned by African Americans who graduated from HBCUs. So as you see, we have some very high percentages. I'm sure it's all relative looking at the grand scheme as to how many people there are in the United States, but still these are some high percentages that we have produced prominent and productive graduates and contributors to society. So I just wanted you guys to see that, because that was a source that I saw from HBCU Lifestyle, and it was just 2020 edition that they did show this. But I just wanted to show you, even though we don't start off equal and we have challenges, and don't get me wrong, we do, but we still produce at a very high and good level from HBCUs. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to you guys and let you guys have a conversation and think about how we just didn't start off on the same level, on the same ground. And I think that some of the pictures that I shared with you kind of depict that as well. So I don't know if, I guess I'm done. I don't know if there are any questions that are going on right now, but I just wanted to share all that with you just so that you can kind of think about the equity and equality that we have in education. It doesn't stem from the same source on both sides. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you. That was something I'm very passionate about. But I just want to kind of share that with you. So Dr. AJ, it's back on you, sweetie.
Thank you so much for that, Pamela. I was sorry it took me a second to get back. I was like furiously scribbling notes from everything that you said. Even though I have the slides, I was still taking notes from all of it. I was just so engaged with it. I actually had a question.
Sure.
Based on your research, because you said that technically HBCUs technically had to have formed before 1964, correct?
Correct.
So with where, based on your research and of course your experience at, being a second generation HBCU grad, family member, and experience and thought, would the existing 105 HBCUs, even if funding massively went up across the board for all of them, would they be able to kind of hold space for enough talent to go through them? Or do you feel like that even though they're after 1964, that we need, that there's a need for more HBCUs? Like how would you, essentially, I guess what I'm asking is, how would you solve for this inequity problem that has been historically set up this way, but because of the historical nature, there is that problem with the classification now?
Right. And that's a great question. So I think if funding was not an issue, if it was equally given out to all schools, that there would be extensions of the current HBCUs, if that's so to speak. So there would be different locations. You know how you have some schools that have a location or a school in Phoenix, and you have one in Ohio, and then you have one in Chicago. I think that HBCUs, the 105 that we have, would be able to do that, and you won't have to come all the way to the South or that particular school to actually go to the school and get that education. But you could also get that history and that they look like me kind of feeling. That to me, it's phenomenal, and it's beyond words. So I do think that that's something that they would definitely expound on. But also in today's technology, in 2021, I really think a lot of courses now are about to go on to online. Okay. And HBCUs are behind the ball on that. I mean, we have some, but nothing like, I can only use the schools here. So, but nothing like Purdue, IU, Ball State. Nothing like that. I hear the kids talk about what they had to do, registration, and how they can do, the hybrid. I'm in school, I'm taking this class, and not to say that HBCUs can't do it, but they have had a lot of struggles. I hear of the struggles that they have had on how to make sure that all the kids have internet and access and computers, those type of things. So again, we don't have the same resources that some of the PWIs do have. But I do think that if funding was not an issue, we would have additional locations, and we would have a broader online service available.
Okay. So my understanding is then the funding would really it's not just the funding, it's also the infrastructure that, because of the lack of funding, that HBCUs have not been able to build up to the extent of predominantly white institutions. And so even if that funding did go into place, it would have to go into more of the infrastructure building rather and serve more populations that way, rather than opening up completely new universities, instead opening up campuses or virtual programs or those sort of things. Okay.
Exactly. Because, there are some state HBCUs, like Tennessee State is a state HBCU. North Carolina A&T is a state. It's probably the largest HBCU. They probably get a lot more funding than Tuskegee, which is a semi-private university. So from sponsorships and corporate donations and alumni giving, that's a little bit more challenging for alumni at Tuskegee than it would be for Tennessee or North Carolina State. Not saying that we all don't struggle, but there's just a slight better than ours, just because they're a state school, so they get the state funding.
I see. Okay. So it's almost like a dual layer of missed funding then, because you're not getting it from the state, but you're also not getting the kind of sponsorships and donations through other sources. Corrales actually has a question.
Sure.
Do you think the chaos that the pandemic has wrought across higher ed be
Mm-hmm.
leveraged to favor HBCUs and level the playing field?
So I would, deep down inside, I would hope that, to be honest with you, I just don't know if we being HBCUs have had the same type of resources that the Purdue and the IUs have had. I want to, and I'm only speaking from Tuskegee experience because I'm a very active alumni. And so I hear some of the challenges that we're having. Um, Bringing the kids back or trying, where are they going to stay? And then make sure that we have infrastructure for internet, online classes all the time. So I would hope that 2020 would open our eyes to expound on that. And I hope the funding that comes in would help build that, not only from the facilities on the campus, but from the infrastructure as far as the technology piece of it. So I hope that answered her question.
His
I would hope
question.
so, but in reality, I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. Corrales, I hope that answered your question. If not, you can always type in chat and I can relay it. In the
Yeah,
meanwhile, I do have another question for you.
sure.
And this is something that I know is kind of, your space, right? And based
Mhm.
on the panel that you and I did together last year and everything,
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could speak to, because the C3EB platform and summit is all about the interconnectedness of these issues and how they affect different aspects of our lives, right?
Right.
From your personal experience, I'm guessing before you went to an HBCU, you obviously, you went to a, well, non-HBCU in secondary ed. I don't even know
I
where
went to a predominantly white high school.
okay.
Yes.
What was the difference in terms of the psychological safety and the emotional and mental well-being from going to an HBCU that affected well, everything in terms of how your entire experience, but also how you kind of envisioned your future and things like that?
So I do realize that was at the minority. I am part of the minority because my parents had the HBCU experience and exposure, and then they exposed me. So every year when I was 8 and we went on a summer trip, we always made sure that we went by some type of HBCU because my father always said, this is how we get our exposure. Because on TV, all you see is I grew up in the Cincinnati area, Southern Ohio. So you see UC, Xavier, Ohio State. That's all we hear. But we don't hear about the Kentucky States or the Fisks or some of the schools, the Meharry, in some of the schools on the West Coast. I mean East Coast. So they made a point to show me that and prepare me. Now I will tell you, growing up in the high school in the town that I grew up in, it was very traumatic. At that, I can say that now. Looking back, when I had a lot of friends, my parents were high in education. Since I was called like the Huxtables of the town, which at that time I was like, no, whatever. But I guess my parents were just in their eyes so well-to-do that I had white and black friends. But then with black, I wasn't black enough, and I was with the white. I was with two black. So I found myself juggling as how I could who I could be when I was with that particular person, right? And I didn't realize how exhausting that was until I went to an HBCU and realized that I could be Pam and still you love me for me and see people like you who are willing to teach me to be as great as I'm willing to be. And that was just exhausting. And that was a lifelong lesson for me to get my eye-opening experience about that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we don't really
So,
get the mindset behind that though. I mean, you really don't. It was really I can say it now. Then at 21, 22, I probably couldn't have said that.
mm, mm. So, couple more comments.
Sure.
Before I get to Corralis's question, we have a comment from Terry who said, when I attended my HBCU, I found that I didn't have to check my culture at the door, that oftentimes PWIs make you feel like you have to.
Yeah, that is so true, Terry. And I completely understand. Unfortunately, that's how it is in the world. But I have a safe haven at my HBCU where I did not have to do that. And that's why I think it just made that experience, the educational experience, that much better, because I could go and be free. I could just be me. What that was, I didn't know, but I got a chance to be me. So I'm glad you had that experience, though. It's a he, right? I want to make sure it's a cousin.
She.
She. Okay.
I'm not sure. I just know Terry. Actually, just Terry. I'm not sure. Because the images are really small, so I'm not able to tell. I'm only reading the names. I don't have my glasses on, so I'm like,
I have mine right here, so I'm ready.
Yeah. So Corralis had another question. Can we get grants from the likes of PayPal and LeBron to get the tech stack leveled up? Can we tap into this? And he put up an article that says PayPal announces $530 million commitment to support Black businesses, strengthen minority communities, and fight economic inequality.
So, Dr. AJ, I really think that equality, equity in HBCUs are a hot topic right now, just because of what we have experienced in 2020, and that our vice president is an HBCU grad. And that's probably why you hear her promoting that and the pride that comes with that, because we didn't have an outlet or a platform to do that in the past. So now I really do think that it's probably putting Howard on the map. Not that it wasn't already in HBCU's eyes, but now it's in the world's eyes, right? But now I think people are trying to find out. There's no thinking. I know, because I've had people ask me, what is an HBCU? Can you tell me about your experience there? So it has just started conversations that I don't think we normally would have had if she wasn't in that position and used that platform.
Yeah. I completely agree. I was actually, as you were going through those statistics, I was actually, it was so powerful to see those statistics, right? Because especially all at once, the way you group them together. And my immediate thought was, how can we get millions into these kind of programs so we get the millions out, and then that representation issue will hopefully start balancing, right, at that point. And then I was thinking, well, okay, then scholarships, the resources and all of that, which is what made me ask you that first question about what is going on here with the historical kind of restrictions. How would you even begin to think about addressing that? And it does seem like that was a great way to think about it. Is you don't necessarily need more, you just need more funding so they can do more with the 105 that exist. Although even the sheer numbers of the 42,000 to 105, that in itself.
That is, when I read that, I was like, oh my God, just look at the weight. It was almost made me in tears that I was proud to even have 105, and we had more than that. Unfortunately, we've had to close some just because they could not stand financially the test of time. But I'm very proud of our 105 that we are there. Now, some of us, yes, we're still struggling, but at the end of the day, we are still standing, and that's it. We still have a win. Yeah, we still have a win. But I do think that if more money comes in, and we invest it correctly and we use it correctly, that's the key for all schools, right? Not just HBCUs, but I think we have to invest and utilize the money in the best way that can get the most out of it. So I do know, like, LeBron James is giving money to HBCUs. I think Charles Barkley just gave some money to HBCUs. There's a whole bunch of other people that are donating money to HBCUs. We just have to make sure that we do the right thing by the funds that we get, and that's going to impact the masses pretty much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question for you before, we get to your closing thoughts on this is how can those who are not in the HBCU families or kind of that network, like how can we build this bridge to one support HBCUs with this kind of, as a community, right? As an overall community, and not just in a financial funding sort of a way, but other ways. And also then how can we as a community then better leverage the talent coming out of HBCUs to really kind of create this feedback loop that we need for the growth.
I think that if I knew all of the answers to that, I would be a very wealthy person right now. But I do think, and like I said earlier today, I think it's very simple in the place where we need to educate and expose. And I think if we are being honest, Caucasians do not acknowledge HBCUs. We do not want to learn the history that comes from HBCUs. And I think if we take the time to educate and learn, I came from Tuskegee, so that's George Washington Carver, that's Booker T. Washington. If you realize the contributions that they have made to society, I mean, every time you open a jar of peanut butter, you should think of George Washington Carver. And he did that with no resources. So only imagine if he was somewhere that had resources, what he could have done. So I think through education, exposure, and again, just trying to partner, just come up with different ideas of how I can get with a school that's much better off than I am. And maybe between the two, we can just become equal. Is kind of what I think. Yeah.
Wow.
So
I love that. And with that, I would.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say also, too, I think with our athletes, if we maybe got more people scouting, some of the HBCU's athletes, then, of course, more funding comes with that. So, and there's talent there. They may not be as talented as, maybe someone who went to UC or UK, but I still don't deny or do not go to an HBCU because you don't think there's going to be talent there.
Right.
There's talent there.
Yeah.
There's talent.
Yeah. And to your point, I think, it would be very beneficial for companies that are working on racial equity issues specifically to create some sort of pipelines through these HBCUs more effectively than they may exist. I don't think too many exist, first of all. And so I think it would be beneficial for companies also to kind of think about those kind of partnerships in terms of paid internships, in terms of, not free ones, paid internships,
right.
As well as, like kind of like the entry level positions and the training and all of that, a lot of these large organizations probably could invest in if they restructured a little bit to actually then maximize their use of the talent that they might be missing out on, right? Like we always talk about how diversity is profitable to the business bottom line, but at the same time, what I hear a lot of is, oh, we'd love to, but there's a shortage of diverse talent. So now I can be like, well, have you looked at HBCUs?
Right, exactly, because the talent is there. I mean, we are world known for our engineering program. And then a lot of the companies who Boeing and things like that, they come to Tuskegee because they want to pick some of the talent that are going to be in that engineering program. So whether it's electrical or mechanical or aerospace or chemical, they want that talent. So I'm just saying, don't dismiss it just because it is an HBCU. And I would think that people are missing the boat because they are not including that. And especially from a diverse perspective, we have got to do better. we have just got to do better and think creatively as to where to get that talent from.
Yeah.
If that's the talent that you want, and this is HR, heck, Mary. If that's the talent that you want, then you have to go to that community and get that talent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And, we can, we're definitely, because I took so many notes, we're definitely going to be continuing this conversation in the clubhouse room tonight.
Yeah.
And especially, considering that the next session that we have coming up is with Dr. Brian Hodgkins, who's going to be talking about combating racial battle fatigue.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the topics are just so deeply intertwined that we are going to have an extended version of this conversation on Clubhouse tonight. And so with that, Pamela, for now, I'd love to hear some closing thoughts from you as we wrap this session up.
Well, I guess I just kind of rehash as to what I was saying earlier today. I just think that if we think of it through a different lens, if we acknowledge that we did not start off equal, and then what can we do to try to level the playing field? And then don't dismiss HBCUs because you think of that myth. Because that's not necessarily the case. And look what we have produced. I mean, 80% of the judges have come from HBCUs. That's huge. Even though we haven't had a lot of judges on the case, but just to think that the ones that we have, 80% of them have come from HBCUs. Doctors, I mean, there's a lot of talent in HBCUs that come, and I just think that we are missing the boat and dismissing the talent that is at HBCUs. So if we could just do education, exposure, try to do more partnership, I really do think that that's going to start the conversation and start the wave to kind of equal things out.
I love that. I love that. And so for you and for anybody else listening, if you do have friends or acquaintances who went to HBCUs and they're on the Clubhouse app, please make sure they join us tonight so we can also tap into their experiences and their insights and have a full conversation about this, because I think this is such an important conversation overall. And so with that, Pamela, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us. I mean, like I said, my mind is blown. I'm so glad I have your deck, because I'm going to be going back to it and doing my own research and coming back to you with questions and so on and so forth. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for thinking of me. And I just want to generate conversation. So I think this is a great topic and it's something near and dear to me. So thank you.
Absolutely. We'll definitely talk about it more tonight. And with that, we will be back in 10 minutes with our next speaker, Dr. Brian Hodgkins, to talk about combating racial battle fatigue. And so I hope you all enjoyed this session, and I hope you are enjoying the sessions of the C3EB Summit Day 2, February version, Rebuilding Our Economic, Infrastructure and Environmental Equity for Historically Marginalized Communities. We will see you in about 10 minutes.